Welcome to One Woman, a brand new show on Shaw TV celebrating the lives of and stories of incredible women in this world. And today's show is no different. I have an incredible woman with me today, Eleanor Dunn. She's a dear friend and has an amazing story. So welcome to the show, Eleanor.
Thank you, Sharla.
So let's start with, you grew up here in Thunder Bay. Let's talk about Eleanor as a little girl. What kind of a little girl were you?
Well, I was very timid, put it that way. And we grew up in what was Port Arthur then and had an actually amazing childhood, loving, supportive parents, an opportunity to just carry on with my interests in sports and school. And yeah, I was a pretty good kid.
Wonderful. I no doubt in my mind that you were a wonderful kid. And did you know as a little girl what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Well, I was always thinking either teaching or nursing.
Right.
And those were actually probably the only two choices when I was growing up as well. For women, it was teaching, nursing, or being a secretary. Not a lot of choice for women in those days.
Wow, which is really interesting as to, you know, this many years later that really the sky's the limit for a little girl.
It's amazing. It
Yes.
really is. And I'm so happy for my granddaughters that they have this experience now of the world is their oyster. They can choose whatever they want. It's fabulous.
Absolutely. And let's talk about that. So you did go into teaching and became a teacher. Now, was that an easy thing, something that you really wanted to do, was be a teacher in this world?
Well, sure. I was open to either of the two options of nursing or teaching. Nursing had a 3-year training program. And when I was a teenager, late teens, my father died. And so I had to give up my idea of going to university to train for a teacher. No university here in Thunder Bay at that time, and so it meant going away. And so Teachers College was just coming on board for a 1-year training course, and so that's what I did, and out into the working world when I was 19.
Wow.
So yeah, teaching has been a good profession for me. I love it.
Right, right. And soon afterwards, you met the love of your life.
Absolutely. Well, it wasn't soon after. I had 6 years of teaching behind my belt by that time. But by the time I was 25, yes, I feel really blessed that I met this man that shared my outlook on life and the desire of what we wanted to do and passions and so forth. And so, yes, that first 25 years of my life was preparing for that moment.
Wow. And let's talk about that, because this maybe wasn't your traditional marriage, so to speak. Literally, it was going to be an adventure. So let's talk about your marriage and where that's brought you. Okay.
1 week after we were married, in August of 1967, 1 week after, we left for Africa for 4 years.
Wow.
Heart of Africa, not sure where I was going, what I was doing, but I did know that I trusted my husband because he'd been 3 years already in Tanzania with the Canadian Peace Corps, which is called CUSO at that time. So it was the beginning of the adventure of 50 years.
Wow. Yeah. And what was that like? So, you know, you grew up your first 25 years here in Canada and living as a woman here in Canada, and then you go to Zambia.
Right.
What was some of the things that you experienced, you know, the difference in the culture and things that you noticed?
Well, for one thing, I wasn't a stranger to travel because my father worked for the railway and we had a rail pass. So we traveled across Canada, as a young child. And I'd been to Europe and so forth. But going to Africa was quite different. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, we were at a really excellent adult education center and were involved with, my husband was doing youth leadership training from all over Africa. And there were expatriates there, people from, just like us, coming from every country in the world almost. And a lot of Zambian colleagues. So it was different. It was a much wider, open, diverse type of friends that we had. And we really loved it. It was good. Yeah.
So did it soon feel like home for you?
Pretty quickly.
Wow.
Yeah, it was our first home, so it became home.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And now you'd been teaching for 6 years in Canada. Was this something that you continued on to do in Zambia?
I'm an elementary trained teacher, but I was able to get additional training for teaching physical education. And because I always loved sports, phys ed was a natural fit for me. So I taught at Hammersholt High School for 3 years. And it was from Hammersholt that we went to Zambia. And interestingly, Zambia was the country that Dag Hammarskjöld's plane crashed. And Hammarskjöld is the high school that was named after the Secretary General of the United Nations. And we actually visited the crash site, and of course, all this history comes alive. So I can't remember your question, but that was what
just
I led to.
teaching in Zambia, if you've continued that on.
Yes,
when you were...
I taught phys ed at a girls' high school initially, and then when we started a family, then I took some time off. But the good thing was I had an opportunity to be involved with the Zambia Preschool Association, because our children went to a parent cooperative, and we knew that there were so many children in Zambia that just couldn't get an education. It just wasn't possible. And many of the school leavers and students that couldn't get into a school flocked to the community centers in Zambia. And these community development workers were just overwhelmed by the number of children. So I was really fortunate to be involved at the beginning stages of a Zambia Preschool Association, where we actually gave training to community development workers to help make their job just a little bit easier in dealing with these masses of children that couldn't get to school.
Yes, and that was kind of my next question for you, was the differences that you saw in terms of the education system here in Canada and education in Zambia, especially in respect to girls. So what are some of the big differences that you noticed? And one being that, a lot of children just don't get to go to school.
Right. Well, the school system itself was mostly rote based. The teachers weren't trained the same way that, in fact, there are many teachers, so to speak, who were in front of a classroom, hadn't had any formal training at all. So all they could do was share what they had learned. So I think the discrepancy that I noticed, first of all, is that boys in a family were always given the option to go to school. So if a family could send one child to school, it would be the boy. And girls were very much needed at home. So that was very noticeable in those days, and yet there were still many, many boys that couldn't get into school as well. So it was a mixed group of children that came to these adult education centers.
Right. And while you are in Africa, you become a mother. So
That's
what
true.
was that like? And I think, as a woman here, you would, I think, maybe worry about what's the hospital and what's the healthcare going to be like and things like that. What was your experience with, having a child in Zambia?
It was actually great. We went to Zambia when it was only 3 years after independence. It had been Northern Rhodesia before there. It was a British colony. And so there were all those hospitals and so forth that were available. They just weren't open to a lot of the Zambian people. So there was a Zambian section. People could still get their medical needs treated. But you could opt for a fee-paying one that you could be a little bit more sure of the quality of the care. So I had a doctor who was Irish, and so he was out there just being one of the expats that were out working in the country, and so there were no worries and no concerns. And of course, bringing up a child in Zambia, they just looked upon that as their life, really. But the only somewhat dangerous things were you had to always be very careful of the health. Stomach illnesses could kill. And snakes that you may come across may be poisonous. So you had to be super cautious about, maybe more so, about the health needs and the physical needs of your children.
Right. And we're going to talk more about that. We're going to take a quick break, but we're going to be right back with Eleanor and talk more about her adventures in Africa. Welcome back to One Woman. I'm your host, Sharla Brown, and today we've been talking with Eleanor Dunn all about her adventurous life. And before the break, we were talking about your time in Africa and becoming a mother there. You have two sons that you had both in Zambia.
Well, they were both their babies in Zambia. Brian was actually born in Massachusetts when we were home for a 1-year leave. But yeah, he knew his babyhood was in Zambia.
Right. And so then, so you spent how many years in Zambia?
8.
8 years, so that's a big part of life. And then you decide to come back to Canada for a while.
Right. We sort of felt that it was time for the boys to get to know their extended families, their grandparents, and pretended being Canadian because they were Canadian by virtue of a birth abroad. And so we made the decision to come back to Canada in 75. Yeah.
And what were your challenges coming back to Canada? Like, people always talk about when you travel, you experience culture shock. Did you have that coming back to Canada, or was it just like how it was when you left?
Going to Africa was easy by comparison to coming back to your hometown. I really experienced quite a bit of culture shock. It took the form of trying to realize that through no fault of their own, people in our hometown couldn't relate to the experiences that we had, and I just expected them to be as excited about them as we were. And when you get the blank stare, you realize that people aren't with you. And so it was hard for me to tell my story of all the wonderful things that we had experienced and have a receptive audience. So I learned pretty quickly that we don't tell a story until people show their interest,
right?
And then it's nonstop chatting after that. So
and I think for people, it's just not being able to relate, or
of
not
course,
having their own life experiences that they can relate.
I totally understand that, and I would be the same. I am sure. But
right.
that was just it was an insight that I didn't get until I went through the experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And but you didn't stay a long time. You were here how many years?
We were here for 4 years.
And you got an itch to head back overseas?
It was good. It was a good time here because the kids, the boys understood, what this was their country. But we always had this sense that maybe we should be returning to another international situation. And I was able to get my first degree at that time as well, so it wasn't time wasted by any stretch of the imagination. But when we were asked if we would be willing to teach at an international school in the foothills of the Himalayas in India, there wasn't much decision to make. Yes, of course you were.
Wow.
So that's where we went in 79.
Wow. So from Africa to Asia and India, which is, a bustling country of people and smells and sights and what was that experience like? And now with having 2 young boys to also bring with you as a family.
Right. India, when you get off at the airport, it assaults you. I mean, the heat for one thing, but the people and stimulation overload of signs and noises and whatever, it's pretty overwhelming. And I think it was a very eye-opening ride to go from New Delhi, the capital where we landed, up to the mountains. And it was a 7-hour or 8-hour ride up there. And wow, that was eye-popping because we saw all sorts of things that you would see if you look at pictures on TV, right? The bullock carts and the camels and the people in the car. It was just everybody going about their business. But wow, what a thing to experience.
And you arrived to what's now home. How did that feel? And, to know that this is where you're going to raise your boys and all that stuff. Was it an easy transition, or was there challenges?
It was actually easy because we wanted to be there. We really wanted to be there. But we arrived in the monsoon. And when you arrive in the monsoon, the school is high enough up at 7,000 foot altitude that you're in the middle of a cloud for days on end. In fact, for several months, 3 or 4 months, you probably won't see blue sky. So we arrived happily to be there, and we were meeting new people. And I was saying, we're just so happy to be here. And the one woman I met went home to her husband and said, I met the most incredible woman today. She actually likes it here in the monsoon.
Wow.
And so I think a lot of it is attitude. A lot of it is preparation. A lot of it is following your passions, that you know what you want to be doing and where you want to be doing it. And every new door has been amazing for us.
Right. And how were your children with the transition? Did they enjoy living in India and growing up in India? Did they have struggles, or it's just what they knew?
That's right. We had dragged them all over the place already, and so this was just a new adventure for them. They quickly met friends. Their friends, like the children at the school, it was a boarding school, and there were 400 students there, and the boys made friends with children who literally could go to 40 different countries on holiday time. that was a very multicultural, religious organization or a school, and our boys blossomed in it. Put it that way. Yeah.
And did you have any struggles in terms of, I think, you know, as parents, we think that, you know, you send your children to school and to have a traditional education, where your boys definitely haven't had a traditional education. Were you excited about that? Do you feel like, I know Brian, he's absolutely brilliant PhD, you know, and things like that. I think lots of times we can get hooked up on just one way of doing things. Did you think that this was a good choice for your boys?
For our family, it definitely was. And they look upon those years that we took them all over the place as good foundation for them in terms of their outlook on life and their global perspectives and so forth. Basically, they had a pretty ideal childhood there. Like you could go outside, because we lived on the side of a mountain. They were up and down the mountains and swinging on the vines from the trees, and like it was fantastic for boys.
Yes.
And but it was an like there were boys and girls at the school. It was even split because it was a very renowned international school that had their graduates go to university in the States, to Australia, New Zealand, to Britain, to Indian schools. So it was truly an international school that prepared students well for post-secondary education. Yeah, so their education did not suffer in the least. In fact, when our boys came home, you know, they found out, Brian came home in grade 9, he found out that he'd already had the grade 9 science program, so he moved on to,
wow.
So they weren't behind at all.
Right.
And that was part of the thing we considered when we took them there. We didn't want to jeopardize their health in any way, and this just enhanced it.
Right, right. And how did you feel as a woman living in India? Did you feel safe? Did you feel, you know, was there any differences that you really noticed, or?
Well, certainly in the villages and certainly in the general bazaar and so forth, women were not as favored. There wasn't the equality as there was for men, but certainly in our school, which is an international school, you know, girls were empowered. Just they were getting an education for the modern society. So, but when you visited the villages, that's when you noticed how 90% of Indian women struggle.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we're going to take another quick break, and we're going to be right back with Eleanor and talk more about things she's been involved with since India. Welcome back to One Woman, and if you're just tuning in, I've been chatting with Eleanor Dunn all about her fascinating life and all of her travels. And I know we talked about Africa and we talked about India, but you've literally been all over the world and done some really incredible things. And eventually you did leave India, and of course you're back here in Thunder Bay. Any troubles when you came back? I know the first time you said you had a lot of culture shock. What were your biggest challenges coming back?
Coming back, when we came back from India, it's 30 years ago now.
Wow.
So we still had 12 or 15 years left of our professional career. So having learned the first time that, what the culture shock of Zambia I had already dealt with. So we came back, no culture shock for my husband and myself. We were just determined to fit in, get started, find jobs, and get on with the rest of our lives. For our boys, it was a little bit trickier because unfortunately we had to move them in the middle of high school, which is not a good time to move teenagers. They'd already built up their friend base and so forth. So coming back to Thunder Bay was difficult for them, but they are really, truly third culture kids. Mm-hmm. They're at home in Thunder Bay and at home in India or Zambia or wherever they happen to be. But they're somewhere in the middle as well. They don't identify with one particular country or another. So for them, it was a little bit more of a struggle.
Right.
They handled it well, but it wasn't as easy as it could have been, I guess.
Right, absolutely. And you come back here, you go back into your career of teaching, but where does, so I know you because of New Vision Ministry, and this was something that was important for you and your husband to get started. So let's talk a little bit about New Vision and why it was important for you to start that and what the organization's all about.
Okay. We retired in '98, so it's been 20 years now, and we knew that we just didn't want to stop and stay in Thunder Bay. There had to be a way that we could use the experiences that we had had to share with others, and that became part of my passion then, because I've had people say to me, I wish we could have done something like that. And so by helping a Rwandan refugee couple go back to Rwanda after the genocide, was the beginning of the opportunity to take people with us to go back to some of these places that we'd visited before. And so New Vision developed, and even though they didn't get their charitable status until 2009, we had teams going here, there, and everywhere. 12 teams from Thunder Bay people who all wanted to join us, over 100 people, to go and help build a school.
Wow.
In Rwanda. And that school now is considered one of the best in East Africa.
Wow.
So since then we've gone to different countries. We went to El Salvador to build houses after the earthquakes there. We got into work back in Zambia when the New Vision, when the Rwanda work was finished. And of course our love was India, right? So we have an excellent partner in Mumbai in India. And we are funding a school in the slums of Mumbai. So that became the focus for us since our retirement. And it wasn't going off and doing nothing after retirement. It was using the experiences and using the skills to continue the journey.
Right, right. And that's the thing. I think a lot of people think of maybe retirement as slowing down and putting your feet up.
We haven't noticed it yet.
And and I mean, I've gotten to know you only in the last maybe year or so, and I don't know how you do all the things that you do. And, you know, like you inspire me in terms of like, it's nothing about its age, it's your passion and the things that you enjoy. So if there's somebody out there who's watching who, you know, might think that, you know, adventure's over for me, or being able to be purposeful, or what advice would you give them?
Just follow your passion throughout life, you know, and for us it's been travel, and for us it's been helping others, and for us it's been wanting to share these experiences with others. So whatever your passion happens to be, continue on into retirement. You know, we were lucky to have good pensions, so we were able to do this totally on a volunteer basis. But it's just like a second career. It's a second career for us, and I think that I'm just so honored and blessed that it has lasted 20 years, and I hope it lasts for a little bit longer.
Yes, absolutely. And you do so many great things, not just around the world, but here in the community as well. You do some great fundraisers that support the projects, and also the Thunder Bay Youth Multicultural here, that you support a lot of their projects as well. I know you're doing a fundraiser coming up soon, so if people want to learn more about New Vision, get involved, maybe want to go on an adventurous trip and help in another country. I think a lot of people want to do those things but don't know how to start. How do they get involved with New Vision?
Well, New Vision has a website. It's www.new-vision.org. So that will have updated information on where we've been, what we're doing, what our current projects are. And then we have fundraisers. So we have one coming up over the Valentine's Day week. On February the 13th, we're going to have an Indian meal cooked by my daughter-in-law, who's a fantastic cook of East Indian cuisine, and we're going to have a fun program to do with Bollywood love scenes.
Nice.
And there'll also be something on our project in Zambia too, so we have someone that's going to be talking about that.
So a fun way to learn more about New Vision, and also enjoy a beautiful meal with some great new friends. Yep. That's a beautiful night. And you know, faith has been a big part of this journey, and I can't imagine, you know, going to so many countries. I'm sure you've experienced all kinds of, you know, beautiful moments, but also a lot of challenges. And what has that played in your life?
Well, our faith life is really important to us, and we really have felt God blessing us along the way. When a door seemed to be closing, we had the confidence to let it close, because that sometimes doesn't have, sometimes it's very hard to do that. But every new door that has opened up has just led to incredible more adventures and blessings. And yeah, it's the core of our life, actually. It's really what motivates us.
Right.
And more motivates us to help empower people to reach their passion, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think a lot of times we look at our lives, especially maybe as we get older, as to, you know, what are the things that we want to leave behind? What's our legacy? You know, when you think about words like legacy and things, what is it that's most important for you to leave behind in this world?
Oh my. Well, we just had our 50th anniversary, and our son spoke at it. So I'm trying to remember some of the things that he's had said that have been a legacy for us. But I guess what I would like people to remember is that we really wanted to build relationships with people all over the world, and that we kept in touch. So that by keeping in touch with people, even if it's once a year or once every 20 years when we get together, or 30 years, it's like we've never been apart. And that building that friendship is the core of what I think things are about. And mostly it is that we've left the world a better place. I hope we have. One friend at a time.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that you've left the world a better place.
Oh, thank you.
And another question that I have for you, as I think as we get older, we get wiser. And what advice would you give a younger person who's just, you know, starting out? You know, maybe they're that 19-year-old that's just graduating, or, you know, what are some advice, things that you'd give a young woman in this world?
You know, I really feel that we have been so blessed to be in touch with young people. There are young people that come over to our home for a meal. They're the age of our grandkids, but we relate as friends. And I'm so touched when they say, you know, you're our mentors, like, tell us about this, or what should we do about that? That probably is the biggest blessing of old age for us, or retirement or senior years, is to still have contact. I mean, we have contact with the younger generations in my family, but contact with others who are unrelated to our family, but still look upon experience as being a great teacher, and they want to know the way forward. So that's probably the greatest joy of this part of our senior years right now.
Absolutely. Just sharing your story, just like you did with me and our audience today. And I want to thank you, Eleanor, for sharing your incredible story. You're an amazing woman who does beautiful things in this world. So I really want to thank you for being on a guest today and being a big inspiration in my life.
Oh, thank you, Sharla.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Be sure to watch next week with more on One Woman.